We're not sure yet. Maybe 9, but certainly no less than 8. And the 10 series that we were doing, examining spirituality, meditation, and things of that nature. And today, I think what we'll do, we'll start beginning to sum up some of these things so that we get in as much in the next 2 sessions as possible that relates directly to beyond concentration. Actually go into the inside of what meditation looks like and things of that nature. So just relax with me today, and we'll just try to bring up some points that we've made in the past and try to begin to thread all this together. I've given you so much information. We covered a lot of things already. And the thing that we want to do, we don't want any of this information to leak out, to fall through the cracks, so to speak. So let's try to retrieve as much of the information that we've covered thus far as possible and begin to fashion it into a fundamental understanding. Now, whenever we attempt to do that, we come to one thing, what I call sadhana. Not what I call sadhana, but what is called sadhana. Sadhana is a difficult term to translate, but loosely it means the spiritual way of life. Because spirituality, if it's anything, it is a way of life. All saints, all sages, all mystics have stressed this point over and over again. It is a way that we live. Meditation is not just a matter of a few hours of sitting quietly in a corner during the wee hours of the morning. Meditation is an attitude, and that attitude is reflected in this sadhana, this conscious and deliberate attempt to live a life that is rooted in spirituality. Progress in spirituality, incidentally, never occurs according to our expectations. That's one of the first things you have to understand. That when we talk about making spiritual progress, essentially what we're talking about is developing the ability to get up every time life knocks you down. Spiritual progress is made by getting up every time you fall. And we do fall. We fall sometimes far beneath our ista, far beneath the spiritual goals that we set for ourselves. You all want to be regular and punctual in your meditation, and we all want to do that. But there are times when you're not regular, and there's times when you are not punctual. And the ideal behind spirituality in those instances, not to lose courage, not to give up, but to get up from that fall and return to the practice. So we're going to talk about sadhana now. And sadhana will necessarily, therefore, include all of the components that we discussed prior in these other sessions. Sadhana, the way of life, the approach that we have to take toward life in order to make spiritual progress, is the heart. It is the very heart of the path that these masters have talked to us about. And sadhana is composed of several levels. The first level of sadhana deals with preparation for the living of a spiritual life. The first part of sadhana shapes our ideals as to what our spiritual goals are, what we're trying to accomplish on the path. And I use all these words accomplish very loosely here. More about that as we get deeper into the topic. But certainly the first thing that we're trying to shape our life to reflect is the concept of harmlessness, gentleness, kindness, compassion. These qualities prepare us for living the spiritual life. We talked about the yams and the yams and all of these other things. These are the things that help prepare us psychologically, emotionally, intellectually, and more importantly, in terms of our attitudes, in order to make the spiritual journey. Ahimsa, this attitude of harmlessness. We have to strive to try to not hurt anybody. But to say of just animals, vegetarianism naturally causes us to relate to animals in a very compassionate way, doesn't it? But if you can be so compassionate toward animals in the form of practicing your vegetarianism and yet hurt the feelings of another human being, then we've not really understood nor have lived the true spirit of the word ahimsa. So one of the things that we are trying to shape our life, we're trying to mold our life according to the teachings of these mystics and saints. And one of the things that we have to bear in mind, that this gentleness, this kindness, this sweetness should be one of the things that we're constantly trying to bring into manifestation in our personal lives. Besides this conscious and deliberate effort to be sweeter and more compassionate and kinder, we also have to begin to put more and more restraints on the senses, particularly the sexual energies in the body. And this is not just true for single people. It is true for those of us who are in a marriage situation as well. The ideal is to begin to try to practice some discipline in terms of restraining the senses. If we don't, of course, you see, these senses will fly to any object in this world. The senses naturally gravitate toward the objects in this world. The eyes wish to see beautiful things, the ear hear melodious sounds, the tongue tastes delicious foods, so forth, so on. And of course, the sexual energy is there. Now remember, the mystics do not condemn sex. But certainly, you see, we are to practice some restraints. What happens really from the subjective side of it? Very often, sex is just another subtle form of our exploitating other people, isn't it? For our own satisfaction. We reduce another human being to an object very often. So we want to try to minimize that. Will you get it perfectly? Absolutely not. You have to remember, spirituality is a path not for those who are perfect. Spirituality is a path for those of us who have imperfections, who have shortcomings, who have faults, who are flawed. Spirituality is a way of life that compensates for our shortcomings, you see. And so we should try to minimize our tendencies to exploit other people's bodies simply for the sake of our own satisfaction and disguise that in the name of love, you see. So this then becomes another component of that part of sadhana that deals with how we are trying to relate to other people in this world, into the world as a whole, how we're trying to live in this world. We have to be in this world, of course. So the first level of sadhana gives us some kind of direction, some kind of guidelines, some kind of goals to help us shape an ideal that influence how we are actually going to be in this world, since we have to be in the world. We might as well be in the world in such a way that it does minimum damage to us spiritually, and that it causes minimum problems for us on our spiritual journey. The mystics call another aspect of sadhana asteya. Asteya translates loosely as, you remember, theft. The ideal is that we should not try to take from this world that which we have not mixed our labor to earn. We should not try to take from other people things that don't belong to us. Stealing does not simply limit itself to the realm of materiality, does it? When you could steal another person's praise, you see. that is something that we wish to try to minimize. And remember, the whole emphasis is on minimizing, because we are not perfect human beings. How can you be perfect in a world that is not perfect? Now, that's not possible. So our aim here is not total perfection. Our aim here is to do this thing as best that we can. So we should be more conscious of not taking anything from anybody, not stealing anything from anybody, whether it is their personal possessions or whether it is their moment of glory, their achievements, things of that nature. We want to try to live off of our own earnings across the entire spectrum of life. Maharaji used to always say that we should not be a burden to anybody, that we should not be parasitical in any shape, form, or fashion. You see? So this asteya then becomes another factor that we include in our whole ideal of what constitutes sadhana. And remember, we're talking about sadhana. We're talking about the way we have to try to shape our lives if we are serious about following the spiritual path. The next area that we must look at is what the mystics have called non-greed. Non-greed. Aparigraphia. Non-greed. What is greed? Have you ever thought about it? Normally, when we talk about greed, we think mostly about things. We're greedy for more cars, bigger houses, more money, things of that nature. Actually, when you examine greed very close up, what you will find is that greed is essentially a preoccupation with the future. Interesting. Greed is constantly reaching into tomorrow, trying to get more than you have today. Greed, therefore, is a flight from reality. Hence, we have to reduce our greed in this sense of the word. We have to live more rooted in the now. We have to develop the capacity to be content, to be focused in on what we have. So much of dukkha, so much of suffering is the direct result of our failure to practice non-greed. And by creating in us all of these immense kinds of desires, we really destroy the peace of our immediacy, the peace of the now, the contentment of the now. So the mystics say that we have to monitor ourselves. We have to watch ourselves. It's very interesting that the early church fathers and mothers, those mystics who really laid the foundation for a lot of the spiritual teachings that inform Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and so many of the other great traditions in the world. In Egypt, would go out into the desert and they will practice what they call paying attention to yourself. Essentially, on the sadhana is paying attention to yourself in that ancient sense of the word. It is watching ourselves, checking ourselves. In fact, when we talk about being seekers of the truth, we're not talking about seekers of some abstract truth, some philosophical truth. That's not a real seeker of truth. That is a pseudo-seeker. That is an intellectual disguising himself in the form of a spiritual seeker. Their appropriate field should be in some university, in some library, poring over tons of musty books. An authentic spiritual seeker of truth is that individual who is seeking truth about themselves. You want to know the truth about yourself. You see, You want to pay attention to yourself in order to know the truth about yourself. You're not so interested in how the creation began and where the creation come from and when will it end and how many different levels. That's not the spiritual seeker of truth that is celebrated throughout all of the literatures. And when we fail to pay attention to ourselves, this is the only sin. Or let me put it like this: all sins arise because we have failed to pay attention to ourselves. One of these early church fathers, Bhagwan, once was approached by some of the brother monks at the monastery who were bringing a very serious charge against one of their own fellow monks, who they said had a woman in his room. And you know that's not permitted in the monastic life. And they were coming to Abba Pum and said, the woman's over there, let's go get him, let's go bust him and excommunicate him. Throw him out of the monastery. What is he doing? He's not following any of the rules, you see. And so Abba Pum said, okay, let us go to our brother's cell and let us investigate and see what is going on. And so as they went into the cell, Abba Pum immediately saw this woman's scarf hanging out of a barrel. He had hid the woman in a barrel, but her scarf was still hanging out. And Abba Pum, seeing this, went immediately over to the barrel and sat on the barrel in such a way that the scarf was not seen by the rest of the brother monks. And they looked all over the room, you see. They couldn't find the woman. They left. And Abba Pum, on the way out, stopped the brother and said, brother, he says, you have to be far more careful. Pay attention to yourself. He never criticized them for having a woman. He criticized them for not paying attention to yourself. You had allowed something weak in you, you see, to overcome you. And this led to the woman being in the room. All of our so-called sins then arise from failure to pay attention to ourselves. Sadhana, therefore, is our conscious and deliberate attempt to pay attention to ourselves. One of the great mystics in the Sadhana tradition, Swamiji Maharaj, in his book of instructions called Sabhashan, Sabhashan simply means true teachings. And the very first statement in the Sabhashan reads that we as seekers on the path of truth should on a daily basis introspect and see to what extent we are still under the sway of anger, lust, greed, attachment, and vanity. That, Swamiji says, is the first order of business for a seeker of truth. So the ideal is that we want to know the truth about ourselves, who we are, what we are, the reality about ourselves. And what is that reality? That reality is that you're not a perfect human being. Something is wrong with you, somewhere, in some dimension. And we need to become as cognizant of that which is wrong in us. Because it is out of that thing that is wrong with us, that part of us that is weak, that all of our mistakes are made, that all of our sin arise from. And so we must know our weaknesses, and we must pay attention to them and monitor them, manage them in such a way that it does not interfere with our efforts to make spiritual progress, to get back up when we fall down. So this greed then, this tendency to want things and situations that don't belong to the now, is one of the areas that we have to learn through sadhana to wash ourselves. The other things that we have to do on the path is we have to begin to develop a tremendous appreciation for this phenomena that is called God. We have to learn to worship God. We have to learn to come into a devotional relationship with that which we're calling God. But now that's a big thing, because we, by God, mean so many different things. But for the purposes of our discussion, by God I simply mean that which is really in control of events. One of the things that we fail to realize is the distinction between that which we can control and that over which we have absolutely no control. What we fail to realize sometimes is the limit of our will. And we become confused, and therefore we try to will that which cannot be willed. We get mixed up, and then we begin playing God. And whenever we play God, you will fail. Anxiety is the outcome of our mistaken efforts to play God. It is very interesting. When you are full of anxiety, and what is anxiety? Fundamentally, have you thought about it? What is anxiety? Oh, sure, it stresses us out, obviously. That's absolutely right. But what are the dynamics that lead up to the experience of anxiety? We all talk about we have anxiety, fears, neurosis. We're all a little bit neurotic. It is an old saying that to be human is to be neurotic, right? But what is the basis of this neurosis, this anxiety? From where does anxiety come into play? Sure, desire. But the mystics have said that anxiety fundamentally is our attempts to control the future. We have not understood the limitations of your will. There's two dimensions that normally we aim our will in. Or let me put it like this in another way. Your will can cover to some extent your actions, but your will never be in charge of the outcome of your action. This was pointed out in our discussion about Karma Yoga, if you recall, in one of the earlier sessions. We said that the Karma Yogi is that individual who has realized this distinction between what they are able to will and what they are unable to will into being. And therefore the Karma Yogi acts without any type of illusions about their actions producing a particular outcome. We have to begin to therefore appreciate that you can, through an act of will, accumulate knowledge, but never through an act of will can you make yourself wise. Now, wisdom is not related to your will to be wise. You can lay down in a bed, but you can't will yourself to sleep. Have you ever noticed that? Even on that simple point. So we have to begin to enjoy the distinction then between these different dimensions. And when we enjoy that distinction, we come into a new relationship with God. You see? We surrender. And so we have to practice the maintenance of this awareness throughout our day-to-day life, that life happens according to the will of God and has very little to do with your plots and your plans at all. And we have to accept. We have to learn to surrender. And that is the whole beauty. And all of the great traditions, what's so beautiful about them, is that they sculpture the body to reflect this attitude. In the early churches and in the Christian tradition, when you pray, what do? What position do you get in? You get on your knees and you pray. Prayer seems appropriate only when you're on your knees, because being on your knees, your body is literally saying that you understand the limits of your will. In Islam, they prostrate themselves, toward Mecca. It's so beautiful, you see. The ideal is that we have to begin to understand, folks, that we're, when I say we, I mean your ego, your persona. That person who you think you are is not in control of it at all. And when you have that understanding, you begin to develop the quality of humility for the first time. Humility is not a kind of berating of yourself. Oh, I'm nobody, I don't know anything, and I'm this. That's not humility. That's really vanity masquerading itself, disguising itself as humility. But humility is this deep understanding of the limitations of your will. Humility is the refusal to try to coerce anybody. Humility is the refusal to try to control anybody. It is to resist that impulse to control other people. Interesting. And why are we able to successfully resist that impulse? Only when we realize that we can't even control the outcome of our own life. How, therefore, are we going to control the outcome of another human being's life? And that is what makes you humble, you see. You refuse to try to coerce. You understand coercing anyone is fundamentally impossible. Controlling anybody is an impossible act, and you drop it. Again, these become the goals that we set for ourselves when we come upon the spiritual path. And I caution you again to always remember that you won't be perfect. Perfection is not possible. We'll do it as best we. So we move on deeper into sadhana. And remember, I'm talking about this is the way we have to learn to live in this world. This is how we have to learn to live in this world. And we continue to develop ourselves. And we come to a point where we discover that, well, just as there's a way we have to live with the world, there's a way we need to live with ourselves. Is that right? How can you live with yourself? One of the problems, of course, is that if you are a seeker of truth in the sense that I've used the word, one who's in search of the truth about yourself, well, the first thing that you will come upon is the realization of your imperfections, shortcomings, your faults, and your flaws. The first thing that you will encounter on the spiritual journey for truth is your own imperfections, shortcomings, and faults. And therefore, in the next stage of sadhana, in the next level of sadhana, the whole task is how to learn to endure your imperfection and how to live with your faults. Most of us fail in this area because driven by our ego mythology, driven by our own mythology, driven by our own propaganda that we've created about ourselves, driven with this insatiable appetite to be perfect in an imperfect world, something that is fundamentally impossible, and insisting on being perfect, loaded with the deception of self-esteem, and the inability to accept our flawedness, our humanness, we lower the standards of perfection. And thereby give ourselves the illusion that we have no shortcomings or faults. You see? We actually pull down a veil over our eyes that blind us, and we can no longer see our own imperfections because we have turned our imperfections into perfections, driven by our own vanity and our own purpose. And so on the spiritual path, on the journey toward truth about ourselves, we encounter for the first time our own imperfections, our own shortcomings, and our faults. And spiritual training enable us to endure our own shortcomings. How to live with them. How to live with them. And that becomes important now, because we now have to learn to develop a relationship to ourselves. And we have to practice that. Will it come overnight? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It will not come overnight. It's a long, arduous training. You see. But we must learn how to come into relationship with the reality of ourselves, where we are at. The mystics therefore say that one of the other things we have to do on this spiritual path, when we try to live the so-called spiritual life, to practice what I call sadhana. Sadhana also can be understood as meaning working on yourself. This is the work you need to do on yourself. The mystics talk about what they call austerity, tapas. They talked about developing the capacity to suffer. Interesting. Because life is suffering. And unless we begin to develop our capacity to suffer, then we will find ourselves constantly tossed hither and thither by the vicissitudes of life. Running from suffering, we run into all kinds of dilemmas and problems in our life. And you ran into problems because fundamentally you were trying to flee suffering. But suffering cannot be fled. It is built into the warp and woof of the human experience. Suffering is important, in fact, in its own sense. Because it is out of your suffering, then, that you turn toward God very often. And so suffering, the poet says, is the crack that God put in us in order to allow Him itself to slip into our lives. It is the door through which God stepped into our lives. That's another issue. The point is that the suffering is real. And one of the things we have to learn how to do, therefore, is to tolerate pain. Tolerate something. And the mystics prescribed a practice that they call tapas. We can loosely translate that as austerity, practicing austerities. Now, of course, some yogis have taken this way out of proportion. But the original ideal between developing your capacity to suffer, developing and practicing austerities, had as its aim the creation in us a certain amount of spiritual strength. For instance, when we fast and deprive the body of food, you see, that is a form of tapas. That is a form of gaining mastery over our palates. Because for most of us, our palate run us. Is that right? The senses are running you. We're not running the senses. And the mystics say we need to practice some training of all of our senses. Train this tongue. You see? Train yourself in such a way that you eat when you're hungry. Right? That you rest when you're tired. You drink water when you're thirsty. Sounds so simple. But we find that for most of us, we are totally under the control of our senses. And the senses, in turn, are under the dictates of the objects of the senses. So objects control the senses control the mind controls the soul. And through the practice of some kind of tapasya, some kind of austerities, we're able to increase our stamina for the day. When we sit in meditation, what is one of the biggest problems? You encounter the pain and discomfort of the body from sitting for a length of time. You see? And unless and until we're able to go on slowly increasing our capacity to sustain the pain of the body, we cannot lengthen the periods of our meditation. You can't read a book to do that. You see? You have to practice that. So sadhana, therefore, covers a lot of things. I'm not exhausted it, but I wanted today to start summing up a little bit of some of the many concepts that we've just been throwing out here as it pertains to preparing ourselves to live the spiritual life, you see. And so we talked about just a few of them. So this kind of training then, of this kind of personal training is very necessary before we can move to the next level of sadhana, which the mystics have called abhyasa. Abhyasa now really talks about the formal practice of meditation and concentration and things of that nature. So, we will talk a little bit now about the next level of sadhana, which is spiritual practice. The actual sitting and meditating that you read so much about. And I've said on so many occasions, both to you privately as well as a group, that the most important thing is that we have to learn to be very regular and very punctual in our meditation. We have to give this mind of ours a good fight, because all our tendencies would be to avoid that. All of our natural predisposition is to avoid that. So the attitude that we bring toward our meditation very often will dictate the outcome of the meditation. So therefore we have to come with the right attitude, the attitude of a warrior. This is the path for lions. You see, if you're afraid of a little suffering, if you're afraid of a little pain, if you're afraid of a little inconvenience, then you're going to have a more difficult time on the abhyasa, the actual practice of meditation. And we have to be regular, we have to be punctual. You see. And we must take advantage of all opportunities to meditate. For many of us, our mental and emotional and psychological condition is so chaotic that if life gives us a 10-minute opportunity to meditate, we should not pass that up at all. You see, meditation, even if it's done for 1 minute a day, you see, is worth it. But if our sadhana, if our attitude is one of greed, then you're going to be not worried about the meditation that is before you today. You're worried about some meditation you're going to do tomorrow. I'm saying, why are you worried about the meditation for tomorrow? Why are you worried about, oh, Bhagwan, will I be meditating 10 years from now? What is that? That has nothing to do. Be concerned. Are you going to get all of the meditation that is available to you today done? That's the issue. You see. To take advantage of the opportunity that you have today to meditate. That is the focus of this. Don't worry about how much time you will put in your meditation next week. You may not even be here next week. We should worry about how much time we can put into our meditation on a day-by-day basis. So this kind of attitude then is the most important thing in abhyasa. We have to have the right attitude toward it. Now today I don't want to sit up here and just pump your head full of more information. Today I wanted to start summing up the information that you already got. So I'm bracing myself for your questions and comments here, right? So let us begin to explore. Because you see, folks, what I don't want to do, we don't want to turn these into just ordinary lectures. When you come to these workshops, you have to understand that you're coming to a community of fellow seekers of truth. All of us are on the same path. This is the context in which you learn about spirituality. Spirituality is learned from and transmitted by one person to another person. It is a very oral thing. You can't learn spirituality from a book. You can only learn it from other people who's on the path. It is from other people who are struggling on the same path that we are on, that we learn from these people. And that is what makes satsang. We call this satsang. Satsang means a true association. True association in the sense that we are in association with other people that are in search of the truth about themselves, just as we are. And by listening to them, we are able to see how other seekers of truth are handling the vicissitudes of the journey, the ups and downs of the journey, how they're handling their meditation, how all this stuff works. So real spirituality can only be made within the context of a group of us. You cannot make spiritual progress sitting in your cell, in your home, alone. Never happened. Never will happen. Spiritual progress is made within the context of a community, of a fellowship, where we learn from each other. You see? So that's what we want to always maintain at the house. We want that spirit here. We're all seekers. We're all on the same path. We can all learn from each other. You see? My function is simply to act as a catalyst, to stimulate you. So let us explore. I've talked about a lot of things in these prior 7 sessions. So let's start seeing how we can actually talk about them now in such a way that we can begin to implement them on a day-to-day basis. Things you need to know in order to practice on a day-to-day basis. I want to turn our focus now on actual following. So, who will be the first to throw the stone and open it up? Why you, Emma?
Well, I got one question just from what I heard today, and just so that my mind doesn't play a trick on me, would you give me a distinction between defeat and surrender?
Defeat and surrender. Beautiful.
Because, the mind is real tricky now.
Yes, yes, yes. When we say that we are defeated, what are we really saying? We're really saying is that I have willed a particular thing, and that thing has not happened, and I am therefore defeated. Right? It means that the ego, you see, withdraws now from the task, usually. Whenever we have the experience of defeat, we usually abandon the effort. Now, I've tried to open up a business and the business failed. I couldn't make it successful. And then I never go into business again. I've been defeated. I tried to move into a relationship, to create a family, and all of these things. Did everything I could. And I was defeated and my marriage collapsed. Now I'll never get married again. Now I never move again in that direction. That is defeat. Surrender is a different thing. It incorporates all of the elements of defeats. Yes, I've moved into a marriage, and the marriage has failed as a result of my effort. I can do nothing. Now I surrender. Surrender means now I open myself up to the miraculous. Right? Now I become receptive. Surrender means a willingness to be changed through a process other than your own willing. Most of us only want to change, only want to do things if those things are related to our own willing. We're not willing to be changed otherwise. Right? Therein lies the difference. Surrendering is the encounter with a area of our own imperfection, shortcoming, and fault. You see, that has revealed to us our inadequacy. And surrender is accepting our inadequacy and imploring a power higher than us to get the job done. So important in any process of recovery. Not just the recovery of an alcoholic or a drug addict, but all of us in some sense, we all are worldaholics, aren't we? So we all suffer from the same thing. Right? But we have to, in order to be helped, we have to open up. We have to surrender. And that is the beauty of the imperfection. That's the beauty of the faults. It's amazing how all of this stuff works together. It is such a beautiful dynamics, you see. That your imperfections, your shortcomings, your faults, and the outcome of your imperfections, shortcomings, and your fault causes you to encounter areas of inadequacy in your life. And if you're brave enough, courageous enough, at those moments, you can acknowledge these imperfections, shortcomings, and faults, and surrender and open up to the miraculous. It's really interesting, you see, that we don't normally enjoy the distinction between the miraculous and the magical. The magical thinking that most of us have is such that we feel that there's something we can do to manipulate something. You know, we can pronounce some kind of incantation and presto, abracadabra. You know, we get the thing we want, you see. So we look for some kind of magic, right, to bring about those things that we want in life. And this magic belongs to ego, doesn't it? The miraculous is very different. The miraculous happens in spite of your efforts. Always in spite of your efforts. The miraculous is not connected at all to your willing. You see. You cannot make a miracle happen. Impossible. It happens when you surrender. So there is a large difference between defeat and surrender. And the thing that the mystic telling us is not to develop a defeatist mentality. This is inappropriate for those of us who are choosing to follow a spiritual path. We're not to become defeatists. We are to surrender. We are to surrender, to open up. And that's what meditation is all about. And that's why meditation has been given such a high status by all mystics, all saints, all sages, irrespective of time, irrespective of clime, irrespective of culture. All emphasis have been put on meditation because meditation is the ultimate act of surrendering. Because in meditation, what are you doing? You're surrendering your body. First of all, you said, body, sit down. I surrender. Sit down. Be still. Right? You're surrendering all of the impulses in your body. You want to sleep. Now that's what your body want to do. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. It's cold outside. The bed is so comfortable. Right? You want to lay in that bed and get your rest. And you surrender that desire. You surrender that. Sitting in that meditation, you're surrendering your mind even. Because your mind wants to continually engage in how to solve its problems. Your mind want to go on thinking, oh, I got this big problem. I need to be worried about how I'm going to pay my rent, you know what I mean? Or worried about how I'm going to do this, you see. And you are willing to give up that and focus your mind on your japa, on the activity of your meditation. You're surrendering your body and your mind in meditation. It is the ultimate act of surrender. It is the ultimate state of opening. You see? So surrendering is a very, very necessary stage on the spiritual path. And sometimes you don't really, remember, you cannot fake it. You cannot somehow cleverly say, oh, surrendering, okay. So now let me do this and do that. Usually you have to hit rock bottom. The Greek mystics had a term for it. They call it kenosis. Kenosis. You have to hit bottom in life. Surrendering normally happens when you hit bottom. When you have encountered the reality that of what the poet has called, that your life has been torn to pieces. That you can't do it. You see? Well, after you married the second husband, and then that marriage failed, and then you married a third husband, and that marriage failed, and you married the fifth husband, and so on. At some point, you bottom out. You realize, damn, you know what I mean? I can't do it. Alcoholics, you know, they have to bottom out, don't they? It's not that the alcoholic is unintelligent and don't realize that this drinking, this alcoholism is tearing my life into pieces. It's tearing it up. I'm losing my job. I've lost my family. I'm losing my health. They're intelligent people. They know the price that they're paying. But they cannot of their own become sober. They tried everything. They tried all the magic to become sober. And they can't become sober. And they have to hit bottom. They have to actually hit bottom. And that hitting bottom, they reach up for a higher power. You see? That's surrender. This reaching into yourself for a higher power in you. And there is a higher power in you. You see? There's an indwelling intelligence in you that is far more intelligent than you are. An indwelling intelligence in you that is dividing cells, that is manipulating the electricity flowing through our brain, enabling us to talk to each other, that is conducting, orchestrating 1,000,000,001 processes simultaneously. There is an indwelling intelligence in us that if we surrender to it and allow it to possess us in every aspect of our life, the healing takes place. Even the effort to be happy. Now I'm telling you, you have to bottom out. I know this sounds strange. You said, now this Bhagwan, you're going too far. But we're here today to tell the truth. We try everything we can to be happy. And you have to bottom out. You have to bottom out. You can will an act of pleasure, but you cannot will happiness. Happiness occurs from the miraculous side. When you surrender, then happiness can happen. But as long as we are trying to, through acts of will, manipulate life in such a way to extract this elixir called happiness, until you have bottomed out, then happiness cannot happen. Yes. Oh, another question.
Another question.
Okay.
Now in your moment of ecstasy, when you come on the path and you put your vows and do your meditation every day,
yes,
while you're in the ecstasy, you don't have a problem doing it.
right.
But as time goes on, what made you continue to do it? What did you do to stay on that path, even when it was hard, even when the mind was saying, I don't want to get up today?
Yes.
What were you telling yourself to keep you going?
Yes. Actually, it's not so much what I was doing, it's what the Lord itself was doing. Because it's really the Lord that keeps us on this path. bottom line, if we must know the truth. But it was the constant, if there was anything that I can take credit for, they say that God gives us the food and he gives us the hunger. The only thing we could take credit for is eating, right? The only thing I can take credit for is reaching up. Because I understood that unless the Lord does this, then I can't stay on this path. It's not possible, right? That's the higher power that is necessary. That higher power in me has to see. Because left to my own tendencies, I'll do no meditation. Let's be clear about this thing here. On your own tendency, you'll do nothing. All your tendency is to not meditate. All your tendency is to be continually caught up in the world and the drama of it all. That is our tendency. And it is the Lord, this deeper energy, this indwelling intelligence, this divine thing in us that through just a miracle get us to meditate. When you meditate for 1 minute, it's miraculous. Because how can a person like you, with a mind like yours, with all of the flaws, weaknesses, shortcomings, imperfection that you got, with all of the karma on top of you, with all of the filth in you, how can such a mind do 1 minute of meditation? Impossible. Unless the Lord's grace is there. You see? So the question becomes, how do you get the grace you invoke? You remain open for it. You ask for it. You beg. You become a beggar on the path. And what is it that you beg? We hear this terminology thrown around all the time. They say you have to become a beggar before God. What does that mean? You see, you have to beg for this thing. You have to beg for this thing. And the second thing I can say to you that might have played an equally important role in hanging on the path was the company of other people on the path. I cannot begin to tell you that satsang is so important. You see, it is the company of other people that are also in search of this thing. You see, because they inspire you. You know, they rescue us from these pockets of discouragement. And that's how come the Master always say that on the spiritual path, satsang is so important. Satsang is so important. It's right up there with meditation. Because satsang is like that fence, right? That keeps the cow inside. And if you remove that fence, the cows go out. In the same way, when one comes out of satsang, then one has no source. I'm reminded of a story about Bill Wilson that illustrates the necessity that we have for each other's company. All mystics have said, keep the company of saints. Saints meaning people who are in search of truth about themselves. The mystics say we have to keep each other company. This is critical. It is healing. And Bill Wilson, the founder of AA, tells an interesting story about the origin of the 12-step program, what led to his insights in the creation of that form of therapy. And he was a recently sober alcoholic for no more than 5 months, and he had to go out of town on a business trip. I don't know, must have been somewhere in Akron, Ohio somewhere. And big business deal. And he got down there, and as things would go, the business deal collapsed. He had a lot riding on this business deal. And that old depression hit him again. Now the alcoholic is alcoholic because through the magic of alcohol, they're able to create an artificial euphoria. Right? Well, he is sober now, right? He had no way to deal with this depression. And them old tendencies resurfaced, right? And the thought came into his mind, damn, I need a drink, right? Because this is work. And he, down in the lobby of this hotel, and he could hear the laughter coming out of the bar and the ice rattling against the side of the glass, you know, and he was ready to go in there and get a drink. But then a second thought came to him right on the heels of that first thought, I need a drink. And the second thought was a realization, said, no, you don't need a drink. You need another alcoholic to be with tonight. Right? And he got on the phone and called one of his friends, you see, that became the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're like alcoholics. You see, we stay sober, you know, by leaning on each other. Radasis are like that. Spiritual seekers on the same path are like that. Our strength lies in each other. So you ask, how do you stay on the path? I stayed in satsang, as you know. I always went to satsang. Hell or rain, I went to satsang. I fought for my satsang. I had to pay a price for that. Because it was many mornings, Joyce said, oh, you going down there again? This is our only weekend off. Won't you stay home with me? I had little children. You know my story. So you were there. You watched. And I said, no, I'm going to satsang. And she'll fight, throw shoes, have a tantrum. What can I do? You know, I'm driving and my heart is broken because my wife is at home throwing shoes. And, ooh, I guess I really should have took the children to breakfast, but I got to go to satsang. Because if I don't go to satsang, I'm going to fall. If I don't go to satsang, I'm going to take a drink. You understand? I cannot go into the world. I'm a worldaholic. I can't have none of that stuff. One drink of the world and I'm wiped out. You see? So I had to go to satsang. You see? And that was one of the things, you see, that contributed a tremendous amount. Because at satsang I met other people who had just went through the same hell to get to satsang. Right? They too were fighting. And they made me feel all right. They took away some of that guilt. They said, well, you know, Leonard, you see, we all got to go through that. You see, don't worry about it. It's going to be all right, brother. You know? But my wife is hollering. I know she let her holler. Mine's hollering too, but you know how we are, right? And I met Clarence Edwards. And Clarence Edwards, you know, old man, right? Even at that time, he was an old man. Clarence today is 85. And Clarence's advice to me as a young man coming to satsang for the first time, and we must have been 19, how old belong? Not young. And Clarence's advice to me says, never miss satsang. He said, the only thing that I can take any comfort in terms of sadhana, he said, because I can't do nothing with my mind, you know, and I'm full of all these other flaws. He said, but the one quality that I have worked very hard on, the one thing that I will base my claim to a right to remain on the path is that I never miss satsang. Clarence said he's never missed satsang. And I, over the years, come to acknowledge the fact that he wasn't lying. Clarence never missed satsang. And we will have satsang twice a week, Wednesdays and Sundays. And Clarence always made satsang. You see? So satsang then, for me, was very, very, very important. You see, when you give up the company of fellow seekers of truth, then you really cut yourself off from that which nourishes you, that keeps you strong, that sustains you through the day. Because the ecstasy do go on the big M. Because you find out that this spiritual progress is not an act of connected with your will. You cannot will yourself into making spiritual progress. You can will yourself into meditate. You can will yourself to get up there and be on the same spot at each time in the morning, right, Avia? We can will ourselves into all of these other things. But you cannot will spiritual progress. That happens on the miraculous side. And initially you think you can will it. So you figure that, well, if I get up for 6 weeks, on time, regular and punctual, and I'll be a vegetarian for 6 weeks, and I don't go out and kill nobody for 6. I mean, we have our own concept, and then we execute our little ego plans, don't we? Right? And at the end of the execution of our ego plan, what do we discover? Godly, I ain't made no progress. Right? Then nothing happened. I saw no lights, no supernatural power, no nothing. Right? And you become defeated. Right? And you abandon the path. You abandon your meditation. And then you begin that long, arduous search for the magical. Now we're looking for some magic way to go inside. We've set aside this hard thing called avyasa. We're not doing no more meditation, not for now. What we're looking for is something else that will happen in the realm of magic that will take us in.
No, what I mean is meditation was good to begin with. It just seems like I got caught up in the world and I can never get back on.
You gotta find time.
Because the world pulls and tugs at you from so many angles.
Yes.
Until really when you break your pattern, it is really hard.
Very hard to get back.
And that's my dilemma.
Yes.
Is trying to come back. It's one thing to have devotion and keep it in your mind, but you got to practice.
You have to feed
and
it.
That's hard.
You have to come back. Satsang is the best thing. And you're absolutely right. Once you lose your pattern, it takes sometimes years to get back in the groove.
Yeah.
That's how come Maharaji said, never sacrifice your meditation to anything in this world. Don't do that, because you may not get your rhythm back once you break it. But satsang is a great restoration of rhythm.
And one other thing I wanted to say was that the approach that you gave to most of the people in the room was really good, in that we didn't have that years and years ago.
Right.
You was pretty much on your own.
Yes.
But you have taken everybody through their emotions, through the psyche, through everyday normal type of experiences, which is good.
They still complain.
Because they got a better foundation.
They still say it's too hard.
They still say it's too hard.
They said no. They said you had it better.
They have the keys. No, you have the keys. You all have the keys. You have a solid foundation. You have a solid foundation because you can see where you fell, whereas I couldn't. I mean, I got drawn out. I was gone. I didn't even know what happened.
Yes.
I did it.
Yes.
But you have a solid foundation. You have good keys. You have good keys on the spiritual path. You have good keys for everyday life, in your day-to-day life. And you can see where you fell, if nothing else, which is one step ahead.
But you're absolutely right. This rhythm is precious. And Maharaj used to always say, this sadhana is like an ant climbing a glass hill. You get almost to the top, and then if you slip, you got to start all over again. You know? So it's just a difficult thing. But satsang is really the key. Satsang is magic. Satsang is absolutely magic. And I'm reminded of one of the early African mystics. These desert fathers of Egypt, these African sages. I mean, these men and women insight was so profound, it's unbelievable. And in the days when Judaism was strictly African, long before the Hasidim had arisen in Europe, under the auspices of the immense Medici Cove, one of the great desert fathers, you see, tell an interesting story. And this is when the Rabbi was still a young man and still trading as a merchant in lumber. And some of his associates asked the young Rabbi, they said, why do you go to the Zadikum? Zadikum means the company of these spiritual seekers. In the Zadikum there is a Zadik. Zadik means guru. It has the same connotation. He says, so why do you're a young man, you could be making money, why are you hanging out, going to this Zadikum all the time? Right? You know so much. It's not that you don't know a lot. In fact, you're brilliant. You know all of these scriptures. You know, you speak so with so much wisdom and everything. We don't understand why the need to go to this Zadiko mental. And so the young Rabbi tried to explain to these people why it is so important to keep the company of the authentic seekers of truth. Why it's so important to go to the Zadiko, to satsang. But he could not make them understand. Right? And later that evening, they stopped by the young Rabbi's house and invited him to go to the theater with them to see a new play that had just came to that town. And the young Rabbi declined, you see, and they went on to the theater. And they went there, and it was a marvelous play. Simply wonderful. The best play they ever seen in their life. And on the way back from the play, they decided to stop by the Rabbi to tell him about what he really missed. And when they got there and they was telling him about how beautiful this play was, how wonderful this play was, the young Rabbi said, no, I know all about this play. I had picked up a program and I read all about it. And they said, what are you talking about? They said, we don't care about you reading no program. You could not possibly have known how wonderful this play is. We seen it. We heard it. We was there. We were in the midst of it. And we're telling you this little program does not do justice to it. And the young Rabbi smiled and said, that's what I was trying to tell you all earlier. You see, you read the Vedas, you read Torah, you read Quran, right? And I've been trying to tell you that ain't nothing like being in the company, right, of those and seeing it with your own eyes. Because when we go to the company of these mystics, you see, we're not going to be told anything. We're going to see it. It's a vast difference. Some people want to be told how to be spiritual. You can never be told how to be spiritual. You have to see how to be spiritual. And that you can only see in the company of spiritual people. One of the young seekers went to the Guru and he was being congratulated. Said, you getting into the initiation now, you're going to be accepted by the Guru, and you're going to get all your questions answered, and you're going to find out all the secret to all of the astute metaphysics of the world. And that young seeker must have been a brilliance, must have been a genius. That young seeker said, I ain't looking for no answer. I'm going there to see how this man tie his laces. You know, I'm going to follow. You see? We don't want to follow. We want to be told. Spirituality is not something that can be told at all. It can be caught. You get caught up in it. It catches you, actually. So this whole concept then of the Sangat, of the company of other spiritual seekers, it is so important. And that is the best thing that you can do to protect your meditation, to protect your spiritual practice. Keep the company of a community of other individuals who are also on the same path. Association. It is very, very, very important. You see? Very important. One more before break. All right. Two more before break. First you.
Actually, I have two, but I'll wait until after break to address them.
She's so sweet.
Bhagwan, I recently came into possession of a book that has sort of confused me about some of the things you've said.
Yes.
And the book is entitled, What Do You Say to Yourself? When You Talk to Yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And basically what he's talking about is what you were talking about last week, about self-talk, talking to yourself and all of this. And what's confusing me, I guess, is the whole aspect of improving oneself.
Yes.
Is it really possible to improve oneself? And I guess what's the most confusing part of what's being said is this whole idea of karma, the Sitchin karma, that we're supposed to be living in now, in this present life. My question is this. He talks about thought and how powerful thought is in creating whatever is manifesting in your life now.
Yes, yes.
And I guess I'm unclear on if the Sinchit karma that you're living out in this present life can be precluded by positive, a positive plan toward thinking, or is it graved in stone? If there's nothing you can do about it, or is this okay? For someone who's been thinking negatively over years, and all of a sudden they found out, my God, I've been pinching myself. I'm the one who's been making all of these problems for myself. And then they start on this plan of thinking positively, but they've got all this negative karma. Is that new thought pattern going to change the karma that they're living in now? You understand what
I
I'm saying?
understand exactly what you're saying. You see, you have the key to that question is on two levels. One is, of course, what we understand by karma. Karma occurs in two dimensions. We can call it outward karma and inward karma. There's a kind of outward karma that is fixed, nothing you can do about that. That outward karma consists of the consequences of your actions. You have acted and you will have to go through that consequence. You must reap what you sow. That means, of course, that the consequence of the action must occur. So that's one dimension. The inner dimension of karma is how you react to these consequences, and that can be altered. That is the karma that can be transcended. Because what makes things so painful very often, Pam, is how you react to them. Your reaction to things. Now, when we talk about thinking, we have to understand something about positive thinking and versus negative thinking. And you have to understand that this is, the distinction really is between like what we would call bad thinking and good thinking. And I mean bad and good, not in the sense of evil and things of that nature. I mean bad and good in the sense that one of the Greek mystics, Evagrius Ponticus, coined a term that he called logismos. Logismos means thinking that is based on magic, thinking that is based on non-reality. For instance, if you base your actions on a kind of thinking that is fantasy and unreal, then the choices you make based on those fantasies and that unreality will produce certain kind of results. Are you following me? Let me give you a better illustration. For instance, if you're suffering from, let's say, anger, and you make a decision to act on that anger, right? Then the choices and the decision that you make to act on the anger will produce a kind of consequence to that, right? That will not influence how you react inwardly to the consequences. Maybe I will have to answer your question privately because it requires me to tell you a lot of other things, and I don't want to try to cheat you by giving you a quick response to it. But you have to understand the bottom line is that all of this is mind game. It's all a mind game. Most of these people have done no meditation, and that's one of the disadvantage of it. These people are people who have read books. They've read programs. They've not been to a theater. You will find very rarely are any of these writers practitioners of meditation. And if they're not practitioners of meditation, then naturally they come away with all kinds of conclusions. The problem is positive thinking, negative thinking. The question is thinking. Drop all of it. On the path, our whole ideal is to go beyond the mind. You think that there's only certain ways of coming about knowing something. You see. And why this thinking? Because again, that's magic. You're thinking that, oh, if I can think positively, then I can manipulate and change the outcome. Nonsense. You're looking for some kind of magic. You're looking for some kind of cheap way out. We're looking for some kind of shortcut. We're trying to avoid hard work. Sadhana. Meditation is hard work. You see? But it sounds so alluring that if I can do some positive thinking, then I can change this here.
You know, Bhagwan, the thing that struck me most about it, and the reason why I went on reading, was because he was talking about self-talk, and you were talking about that.
Self-talk.
You know, when you're talking, and he was talking about how oftentimes we talk to ourselves, we don't even realize the effect of our, I mean, we're not conscious of what we've been thinking. And we're acting out of this all the time.
All the time. I don't dispute that. But the solution, you see, is to transcend all of that. Because like you said, Pam, now you have this pattern of a way of talking to yourself. Just some scar, this tendency. Right? And that is just ingrained in you.
That's unscarred.
And there's a tape. See, we should have a tape where we talk about, Rob may even have it. You look in your library, Rob, where we talk about kutaka, vitaka, and taka, the three modes of thinking. Because your question is so profound, but it'll take a whole period here to answer it. And I will therefore defer you to the tape. And on that tape, we talk about the correlations between the self-talk that you do, that commentator that is going on. And remember, in meditation, what are you doing? You're withdrawing your attention from this commentator. Isn't that right? If you're not listening to this commentator inside your head, then you can't be influenced at all by the commentator.
So by meditating, what about when you're not in meditation?
You shouldn't always be in meditation.
Oh, okay. Okay, Bhagwan, you get me on that.
I got you on that one. You should always be in meditation. Whenever you come out of meditation, whenever you give up this discipline, you now open yourself to the influences of your commentator inside your head. And God knows what this commentator is going to do. God knows how it will influence you. You see? And that is why one has to hold on to the practice. One has to cling to the Simra. Because the Simra not only protects you inside, it protects you outside. Let us take a break, and then we'll start back with you, Sandra, and then Pam for her second question. And we'll return at 3:05. Just in the nick of time. To our subject on the sadhana. And a couple of things I want to say, though, before we return to our discussion. I first want you all to welcome Kiba. Kiba was initiated yesterday. Stand, Kiba, so everybody can gloat over you. So now, if you see her acting strange, nerves on the edge, then you know that she suffered from the same thing we do. So very good. And I want to thank Linda, my sister-in-law, for preparing a delicious meal. She had pity on you all. She made a special trip here knowing that I've been punishing you with pizza. Knowing my one-track mind, she decided to come and really get the meal. We thank you, Linda, for taking your time and preparing some good food for us here today. And of course, I want to thank you all for your continued money saver. That you all, your contribution, and Pam for always looking out for that side of the realities of life. And just want you to know we appreciate all of that. It always comes in handy to help us perpetuate this situation in context of here. So, with that said, we'll return to our discussion about sadhana. And the ideal is that we're going to discuss this today, next session, all the way to the last minute. We want to start really exploring the subject from a very practical perspective. And I know that Sandra, you had a question, and Pam had a question right before the break. and she was raising the subject about this commentating that goes on in the form of thinking, this shattering. And you know, fundamentally, we experience the mind through this talking. Mind is nothing but you're listening to the conversations that are going on in your head. You see, that's all thinking is. Thinking is fundamentally listening to that stream of conversation. And that conversation that goes on in your head that we are calling thinking, that is really in the form of listening to these series of thoughts, are divided into three fundamental categories. What you call negative thinking, the yogis, the ancient mystics call kutaka. And that is a kind of thinking that is orientated finding only that which is wrong. It has become habituated in finding only that which is wrong. And under that kind of orientation, no matter where your thinking turns itself, it will find something wrong. Whether you're looking at the world through that mode of thinking, if you're doing that, everything you see in the world, you will find something wrong with it. If you turn that thinking toward yourself, it would also see what's wrong with you. That orientation, that mode of thinking, can only see that which is wrong. And the yogis call that kutaka. And so you'll begin to see that this self-talk, as Pam called it, that is going on in our minds all the time, when it's in this category, can be very destructive, simply because as you think, so do it becomes. As you think, that thinking produces action. The reaction to thoughts are actions. Those actions then are flavored with the essential quality of your thinking. So, the mystics gives us some insight by which we can measure where we stand and where we can begin to categorize our own trend of thinking. The next one is vitaka. Vitaka means the opposite of kutaka. It is what they normally call positive thinking. Kutaka is what they normally call negative thinking. And you would think that to be able to be orientated toward a vitaka mode of thinking would be an advantage, because you're doing what they call so-called positive thinking. But the reality is this, is that a person that is primarily orientated toward seeing only that which is positive very often winds up being very naive, because the world is made up of both, good and bad, negative and positive. And if you only are able to see the positive, then you tend to be unrealistic. You see, you tend to become over-optimistic. You become an extremist in that direction. And you can look at a tiger and start thinking that the tiger, since it's so pretty and such a nice, sweet little animal, and reach your hand in a tiger cave and get it snapped off. So, vitaka then, the opposite of kutaka, is that kind of self-talking that goes on in your mind, that kind of chattering that goes on in your mind, that is orientated seeing only that which is positive. It only sees one side. And that's what both of those suffer from. They only see one side of the reality. And then there's a third category that the yogis have divided this self-talk into. And that third category is what they call takar. Takar is neither kuta nor vitaka. It doesn't mean that it's also the balance between the two. What it is that there is no direction to the thinking. Now your thinking is just all over the place. It is just helter-skelter, you see. And in that state of self-talk, then there is no continuity in anything. The mind is just floating all over the place. It is chaos. That state of thinking that we call chaos is what the mystic meant by the term taka. So these then are three of the fundamental categories in which we can file the self-talk that is going on inside of our head in the form of our thought that influences and turns our behavior. There is another way of looking at this thing. The mystics have said that one way of classifying this chattering that goes on in the head that we call thinking, this constant paying attention to, the comments that are being made inside of our head, is to divide it into what they call good thinking and bad thinking, or right thinking and wrong thinking. Buddha call it right thinking. You see, right mindfulness and wrong mindfulness, wrong thinking. What is wrong thinking? Wrong thinking, this school of thought says, is a kind of thinking that is not based on reality. It is a kind of thinking that makes its choices based on hopes. For instance, you have so many hopes. But what is hope? Hope is not a reality. Hope is something you hope happens. And if you make your decision based on hopes, then those mystics say that is a wrong kind of thinking. And wrong thinking produces wrong choices. Wrong choices produces wrong consequences. And wrong consequences are painful. Right? So if we want to change the flavor of our outward experiences, then we have to go back to the least the level of the mind. And we have to change something at the level of the mind. And that's what meditation does. Meditation works on the mind. Not so much on the body. On the mind itself. It restructures the mind. The Maharaj used to always say that we can be in two different kinds of relationship with the mind. We can be what the mystics have called a mamuk. Mamuk, M-A-N, I'm too lazy to get up to date. M-A-N-M-U-K-H, I believe. Mamuk. A mamuk is a individual who simply blindly follows the dictates of their mind. That is a mamuk. Whatever comes in the mind, that's what you do. You are following your mind. You will be a victim of this wrong thinking, with no exception. And what Maharaj used to call a gurumukh. A gurumukh, one who follows the guru, that higher thing inside that is beyond the mind. If you doesn't have access to the guru inside, if you have not transcended your mind where you are now able to receive the direct influence of the Satguru, that higher part of yourself, then Gurumukta means following the teachings of the gurus. Because the teachings of the gurus will almost always run counter to your mind. Almost always. So those are the two broad categories that are often used to distinguish how we relate to the mind. This wrong thinking that produces wrong choices, that produces wrong consequences, is very often discussed within the context of the 5 perverted thoughts of mind, or 5 perverted states of mind, rather. A form of wrong thinking, in addition to hope, you see, have been indicated by these 5 negative states of mind. Let me give you another example before we talk about those. Then I will address your question, Sandra, I haven't forgotten. Just as wrong thinking, I know that strikes you as odd. How can hope be a form of wrong thinking? Well, also consider the fact that the mystic considered fear also to be a wrong state of thinking. Whenever you make choices based out of fear, based on fear, those are wrong choices, you see. And they will lead to wrong consequences, or painful consequences. Now, as far as the 5 perverted states of mind are concerned, whenever we are in a state of mismanaged anger, right, that is a wrong state. And decisions made in that state will produce wrong consequences. So whatever choices you make on the basis of your anger will be wrong. The same is the case with lust. The same is the case with greed, and so forth and so on, you see. So these are wrong ways of thinking. You can't do anything wrong unless you are first a victim of a wrong way of thinking. Do that make sense? How can right thinking produce wrong results? It's not possible. All wrong results come from wrong thinking. And wrong thinking is any kind of thinking that is not related to and rooted in reality. So, that's a mini workshop, huh, Pam, on self-talk and the categories of self-talk. Now you remember those now? I see. You had answers but not questions. You see how useless answers are without questions? And sometimes we always think that answers are the most important thing. No, questions. Because if you have no question, what good are answers? So you had to wait a whole year to find the right question to an answer you've had all the time. All right. Now, Sandra, you had it.
Right, my question has to do with entering in the kingdom of God.
Yes.
And I know we have a technology now and a methodology for doing that, but the Christian tradition said to enter into the kingdom of God, you have to come through Jesus.
Yes.
And I want to know what, that's sort of magical thinking, right? I mean, or what is meant by that is that he is a living master, and so therefore.
Yes. It's magical thinking 2,000 years later. But at the time when Jesus made that statement, certainly what he was stating a fact. And what Jesus is saying is what all mystics are saying, is that the only way to come into the kingdom of God, representing making spiritual progress, to arrive at the destiny of our individual spiritual journey, is in the contact and in the company of other spiritual people, especially that person who has made the journey already, you see. And there is no other way to come into the kingdom of heaven. There is no other way to make progress on the spiritual path unless you go through a living adept, a living spiritual director, a living master, a rabbi, or whatever term you want to call it. It simply means that you must come in contact with someone who themselves have gone in. And that you cannot do that by going to consult Scripture. This is what Jesus meant to say to the people. At that time, of course, they were still trying to follow Torah, you see, and all these other things. And what Jesus was trying to impress upon that community of Jews, and remember, Jesus was a Jew to the last breath. You see?
With a Spanish name.
With a Spanish name.
That's not Jesus. It's not Yeshua. So
That's
they
right.
call him by the wrong name.
That's Latinized. But so we know that there's been so many liberties taken with the whole story of Jesus and all these other things. The point is that he was a member, Orthodox. He was a Jew. And the thing that he was trying to impress upon them was that you need a living master. Now, the Jews simply wanted to continue following Moses. Now, Moses was gone. Moses had been dead a long time, you see. And they were trying to elevate the Torah to the position of a guru. No Torah, no scripture can ever replace a living teacher. Not possible. These scriptures come out of living teachers. Whatever they say becomes scriptures, not the reverse. And the Jews have fallen into that tradition. Even though the tradition itself was telling them that a Messiah, the Moshiach, you see, has to be there. And Jesus was simply reminding them that I am the gate. You can't come unless you come through me. And that capacity, he was speaking on behalf of all saints, all sages, all mystics, you see, have said the same thing. And this seems, Sandra, to be the natural design of the Creator, you see. That whatever the Creator wished to give to you, the Creator would give to you through another human being. There's no other way to reach you. You see. There is no other way to reach you. And remember, the limitation is not on God. The limitation is on us. You see. We're so small that that's the only way to reach us. So someone has to come, just like us, you see, and to initiate us into the practice of entering the kingdom of sight. And all the scriptures in the world cannot initiate you. Now you see, no scripture can answer your questions. Today we're sitting here asking each other questions, and we're finding answers from each other, aren't we? And you put this same question about, there can be no answer. It's dead. It's inanimate. And so they don't replace these things. So this then makes the role of the living master essential. Not only in times of Jesus, but in all times. This is how it is. This is the way the path has been constructed. So we always must find the company of these spiritual people. And once we find their company, we must submit and surrender in their company. You see. And remember, this submission and surrendering to these spiritual directors is not based or predicated on the assumption that they know more than us. That's not the issue. Because sometimes, quite frankly, the disciple knows more than the guru. That's not the issue. Surrendering, submission is an indicator of the maturity of a soul. You see? That this soul can surrender, meaning that this soul now has the capacity to learn. A soul that can surrender and submit has not yet matured to a point where they can learn. They're still too full of it, you see. And so Jesus himself, you see, submitted to John the Baptist. So the story tells us, right? He himself had to subject himself to initiation. And this is how it always has been. And so this continues today. That's why I said earlier, Sandra, that real spiritual progress is always made within the context of a sangha, of a fellowship, of an association with fellow seekers of the truth. Always. That's how it happens. Spiritual knowledge is transmitted from one person in that group to the next person. It is a transmission type of thing, you see. It involves our sharing with each other the antidotes from our own personal efforts on the path. And now someone has discovered how to overcome sleep in their meditation, and they share that with us and help us. Someone has learned how to overcome adversity in their outward life in such a way that it doesn't depress them so much that they fall off the path, and they share that with us, you see. And so we learn, you see, in this process of sharing. And that's how it always has been. So there's always been these communities. Jesus himself was a part of the Essenes group. The Essene group was the esoteric dimension of Judaism, long before the advent of Hasidism, which is commonly thought to be the most esoteric aspect of Judaism, you see, that still possesses the mystical contents of Judaism. Because Judaism has an orthodox dimension, you see, but it has a very unorthodox dimension as well. It has something in it that is equivalent to Sufism, you see, to Buddhism, you know, to mysticism. And the Essenes built their whole approach toward God realization on that. You see. And so in that sense, they were a little bit different, you know, the pious ones that they called themselves, you see. And Jesus came out of this community. And this community was very versed in the mysticism of Judaism. Their vegetarianism was still intact. The teetotalism was still intact. Meditation was still intact. It is not commonly known that the early Christians and the early Jews were great practitioners of yoga. And there are still remnants of this yoga. St. Anthony, the African founder of the monastic system, there on the banks of the river Nile, taught a very exquisite form of meditation. This was lost, you see, over time. And it was reduced so that now you need to do nothing. You see, you just hold your Bible and you think reading your Bible make you a Christian. But what about those early church fathers and mothers, those early Christians who were practicing Christianity long before the Bible was even put together? How did they practice Christianity in a time when there was no Bible? That is what the Christian must find out. There was no King James. That's medieval. It's just a few hundred years old. Right? How did the early Christians practice Christianity? And what was it based on? That is the question. You see. So this is something that can be looked into at a much deeper level, perhaps at another time. Sandra, you do the research for us. I'm getting too old for this now. All right. Yes, sister.
Bhagwan,
Yes, sister.
why do you think that we're here?
Well, that same question was asked to one of the great Zen masters. So I have to borrow that Zen master to reply to that question. When he was asked by a seeker to answer that question, why were we put here? And he said, we were put here, God put us here to ask that question. Because this triggers the search. There have always been those great questions that man and woman have wrestled with from time immemorial that serve as the foundation of the opening of the spiritual journey. And one of those questions is, why are we here? Because there doesn't seem to be any reason why we should exist. Think as rationally as we like, and we can come up with no rational explanation for existence. Period. Existence doesn't make sense. It is mysterious, inscrutable, and provocative. And it provokes us into this trying to answer this question. And the whole spiritual journey is an effort to find an answer to this question. So,
Have you found the answer?
well, let me put it like this. You want another story?
Why not? Because I have some old
That's
stories.
right, that's right. No, but actually you see, it is an open-ended journey. One never finds the answer to that question. One finds the experience to that question. The answer to that question is an experience. You see. And that is something that each of us have to undergo on a one-on-one personal basis. And so that is what we have to do. And that is what meditation does. Meditation answers all of these questions in the form of giving us an experience. Very often the question arises out of the absence of experience. You see, if I am, having the experience of a thing, I don't ask if I'm drinking a coffee or if I'm drinking some of that soda. I don't ask, how does this soda taste? The question becomes mute. I am tasting the soda. I am tasting the coffee. You know, I can come in, oh, this coffee is good, or this soda is so sweet, it's so cool and refreshing. It's a different kind of statement made about it. But the question is never, how does the coffee taste? You see? So we ask that question, how did the world begin? Where did I come from? Where am I going? It is questions that we ask in the absence of an experience of our own reality. When we experience reality, those questions fall away. Just as when I taste coffee, I do not ask, how does coffee taste to me? I experience it. But initially, these are great questions. The fact that those questions arise in our minds is grace. Because sometimes, you see, as Emma pointed out earlier, we're so bogged down in our world. We're so worldaholic that there's no time to pause and reflect, to even question what's behind this drama called life. You see? the scientist tries to satisfy their appetite to know the answer to this very question by peering into their microscopes, you see, and losing themselves in their laboratory. Science was born out of this same quest. Science means knowledge, right? And so the scientist was in search of the answer to the same question, and they have not found it.
Well, Bhagwan, when you said that we're here to learn the lessons of life and to eventually evolve and become higher beings.
That sounds good to me. Write
That's
that
the only
down.
kind of answer
Let
I
me
can
write
come
this
up
down.
with.
You will make a note of that, huh? That's pretty good, sister.
But I just wanted to see what you had to say.
We're here to experience. We're here to experience. His life has been called a journey, right? But a journey, you know, is never in a straight line, not a true journey. Right? I remember years ago seeing a little cartoon in the paper, and it was this little boy standing at the front door in the last frame, telling his mom, "Mom, I came straight home from school, but I did come straight home from school." You know how moms are always telling us, come straight home from school. And so he was standing on the doorstep, and his mom is on the door, and he's sitting there with his little face and said, "But Mom, I did come straight home." Now, in the frames preceding that, you see where we got out of school. One frame shows him cutting across the schoolyard, jumping in a puddle of water. Another frame shows him petting the dog. Another frame shows him swinging in the park. And there's little boys that want, you know, all over the place. But his goal was to come straight home. Even though he made all these detours, his goal was to come straight home. In that same way, our goal is to have experience, right? To realize God, right? But we go in a very zigzag way. Very zigzag. So we're building up the relation, the experience of God realization. We're laying the experience down layer by layer by layer by layer by layer. We are awakening. We are blooming. We're doing the same thing that the plants will be doing in just a few more days. We're blossoming. We're blooming. We're coming into greater and greater life. To be human is a process. We're being human. We're in motion. So there's many different kinds of answers. Depends on who you ask. The scientist will give you one answer. The poet will give you another answer. The religious person will give you this answer, and so forth and so on. But in reality, sister, it's just wonder. It's just miraculous. It's inscrutable. It is mysterious. Life in creation is a great mystery. It is just a great mystery. And mysteries are made to enjoy, not to be explained away. All right? Not to be explained away. So we want to talk about any of the things that you'd like to talk about that we talked about in the prior sessions. So we want to begin to try to find actual ways to apply all of this stuff that we talked about. We want to learn from each other. We want to get into this thing. We talked about a lot of stuff. We've been given a mountain of knowledge. But that knowledge now needs to be converted into wisdom. And the only way to transform knowledge into wisdom is through the application of that knowledge. And that's what sadhana is. Sadhana is your conscious and deliberate attempt to apply all of this knowledge that we picked up in our books and in our conversations. Sadhana is shaping and molding our life according to the advice and the instructions of these great saints and sages. And so that is the aim and objective. Next week we will begin to explore the other side of meditation. We'll begin to explore the inner experiences that are associated with meditation and things of that nature. So this is the last call for those before you get on board, huh? To get further clarification. Yes, sister.
Is there a particular reason why we have not shared the sound current, the technology of listening for the sound with most of us?
I intend to do that. I'm glad you pointed that out. I think after next week, probably toward the end of this month, that I will be asking those who have not been instructed on how to use the sound current for the basis of focus and attention, that we will come together and where this technique can be shared with you. I did not include that in some of you all's instruction out of compassion, knowing that it's very difficult for people to go from 0 to 2.5 hours. You glad I did that now?
Yes, I'm very glad you did it, Bhagwan.
But there was a few unfortunate souls that I had no mercy on. And I just punished them. But I thought that it would give you a chance to get a little adapted to this. The listening to the sound currents, you see, is a little, it is really technically the premier form of meditation. Simran, you see, is a training to get you able to manage your attention, to withdraw your attention, to at least the degree where this attention becomes strong enough to pick up the sound, the shelter, you see. And then just as you are fixing your attention on the Simran and all these other things, these other practices, in Bhagwan, now you fix your attention on the sound of the self, the sound of consciousness, the sound of the soul, or audible life stream, so many different terms. And the reason that the sound becomes the ultimate form of spiritual practice because sound alters the frequency of consciousness. It is sound that generates alternate states of consciousness. And so by being able to pick up the sounds that are going on in the body, right, we're able to trigger different states of consciousness. It's like frequency on a radio. It's changing channels. And so that is the purpose of the practice of Bhagwan. But Bhagwan requires a certain maturity of attention. Bhagwan requires a certain degree of growth, maturation. And you can't leapfrog, therefore, over Simran and Dhyan. That is the whole purpose of those practices, is to give us a kind of training. So that ultimately, we're able to just focus our attention in on the sound and change the frequency of consciousness. That's what you do every night, you see. When you come out of dream into the wakeful state, you're coming out of that as a result of sound. You just don't know it. It is sound that wakes you up. Yes.
Yes. So you were answering Emma's question and saying that one of the things we need to do to refocus ourselves into meditating regularly is to maybe at some point just to pray. When you said beg, were you meaning to pray?
I mean all of that.
Pray.
Beg, pray. Open ourselves up. And you will automatically do that when you bottom out. See, that's the beauty of it. When you really, really bottom out, when you really encounter your own inadequacy, you will beg. Prayer will come automatically. There will be a howl that will come out of you. The cry of the helpless soul. You see. And this is the real prayer. You see. This is the real prayer. This is the real worship. Or real worship and real prayer emerges out of the context of that experience. You see. So, prayer is very important. And the ultimate form of prayer, of course, is meditation, naturally. You know what I'm gonna say. It's the same old stuff, right? Everything culminates in meditation. But there has to be a kind of thing. Emma was asking how to stay on the path. Simply pay attention to yourself. If we pay attention to ourselves, and by paying attention, if you really look for the truth about yourself, that seeing of the truth about yourself will keep you working on the path, will keep you open, will keep you receptive, will not allow you to drift off, to doze off, to get lax, you see. Like you keep going to work because you know actually what you got in the bank, right? It's no problem, right? Right? You open the refrigerator door, you see, and you go to work and you punch in because you are in touch with the reality, right? When you pay attention to yourself, it's like opening that door and you look inside and you really see where your condition, and you automatically out of that seeing reach, work, invoke, quest